Goats have been upgraded in Minecraft 1.19 now that goat horns have been added to the game, so in this video learn everything you need to know about them. So where do you find this interesting mob? Well, they generate in mountain biomes, but not in every mountain biome. It is the jagged peaks, frozen peaks, and snowy slopes where the goats will naturally generate. However, the stony peaks biome and the grove biome will not have the goats spawn there. So if you're looking for one, make sure to look for a snowy and tall peak without any trees and not a stony peak. Now, just like a similar mob, the sheep, the goat is bred with wheat. And if you have two goats breed, you will get one baby goat. And we can see the baby goat right down here. But there's something interesting about the baby goat. Unlike a lot of baby mobs, its head is about the same size as the rest of its body, unlike some mobs where the head of it is the same size as the adult. But as well as that, baby goats have no goat horns on them, like you can see on this little goat right here. But once this baby goat grows up, which can be sped up by right-clicking on them with wheat, it will automatically grow horns. However, for goats that naturally generate into the game or with spawn eggs, those goats can sometimes generate in with only one horn like this one. They'll never generate in with no horns, but oftentimes you'll see them with only one horn when you're walking through the mountains. As well as that, 2% of goats that spawn or 2% of goats that you get from baby goats with breeding are screaming goats, known as screamer goats in Bedrock Edition. You can summon them in the game with adding the NBT tag is screaming goat :true, and that will give us a screaming goat. Now you'll notice with this goat it doesn't have any horns because of the way the command I had set up, but if you hear this goat it'll have different sounds than they normally do. You can sort of hear those strange screaming sounds it has. Now screaming goats have a couple interesting properties that normal goats do not. So of course the first one is almost all their sounds are different. They're all basically more scream-like and not as standard goat-like. Some of their sounds are even very funny. These screaming goats will also try and ram things more often than the standard goats do, which is good because the screaming goats drop goat horns that are different from standard goats. Now all goats have the ramming behavior and some other behaviors, but the ramming behavior for all goats, normal and screaming, basically works when if they see a unmoving mob, so just no movement whatsoever, and they are 4 to 16 blocks away from that mob, then they will try and ram it, or they could try and ram it. Now this often ends up being one ram every 30 to 300 seconds per goat, so it's not incredibly common, but of course if you had a lot of goats you would get a lot of them trying to ram you. You can see that one just rammed me there actually, and if we're still again, they may try ramming me as well, so it's not super uncommon. Now the goat ram itself doesn't have much damage to it. The problem is, as you just saw, I incur some knockback from that. So these annoying goats can oftentimes knock you right off the edge of a mountain, so be careful if you're near goats and a cliff that you're still moving and not being still, or one of them could make you go right off the edge and die from fall damage. As you've probably seen goats in Minecraft do, they can jump incredibly high, up to 10 blocks high and 5 blocks wide, which gives them the ability to scale basically any mountain in the entire game. And something interesting is that goats always try and get to the highest part of a world that they can. You can even see these goats here trying to get up the mountain, and those goats over there are sort of trying to go to the summit of that small peak. Let's say we had some goats all the way down here, they would slowly make their way all the way up. And of course one of the ways they do that is with their big tall jumps. Now goats aren't immune to fall damage. If they fall over 13 blocks, then they will take damage just like a normal mob would. The reason why it has to be 13 blocks or more though, is they take 10 points less fall damage than any other mob would. So until they take more than 10 points of fall damage, all of that would be negated, making them not get hurt at all. And also because of the treacherous powder snow that is in a lot of Minecraft mountains, the goats are smart enough to avoid walking into it. Unlike some hostile mobs that will definitely wander into powder snow, the goats know the mountains well, so they will avoid it just like, let's say, they would avoid lava or something like that. Although if they do happen to fall into powdered snow, unfortunately they will still freeze like a standard mob will. Now goats are cute and all, but what do you actually get from them in game? Well, there's two resources they give you. The first one is milk. So you can right click on a goat to get goat milk. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually say goat milk on the item and it works exactly identical to normal milk. But still, if you want some goat milk from a goat, you can always right click on them with a milk bucket And they work like a cow giving you infinite milk. You can just spam right click and get tons and tons of that. The other thing they give you is goat horns. So very rarely when a goat will ram you, they'll sometimes ram into a naturally occurring hard block instead, and that will make them drop off their goat horn. And since goat horns are the thing added in 1.19 and also the most important part of goats, I'm going to start discussing them right now. So there are two places you can get goat horns. The first one is of course from goats, and the second one is in pillager outposts. There is a 100% chance of getting a goat horn in a pillager outpost, but you only get the standard type of goat horn. Because basically there are two types of goat horns. There is the screaming goat type and there is the standard type. There are 4 of each. There's 4 screaming goat types and 4 standard types. And you can only get those 4 standard types from the pillager chests. But again, because it is a 100% chance in every pillager outpost to have one of these goat horns, it can be much easier to collect these. Now when you get a goat horn from a goat, it will actually make that horn disappear from off their head. So they'll go from a 2-horned goat to a 1-horned goat and then to a no-horned goat. And of course the goat horns never grow back, so once you have a no-horned goat then it's not incredibly useful and you can't farm any more horns from it. Although it will still ram like normal, it just cannot drop any goat horns. And I actually like the idea of sort of having the items drop off when you get it, as it's not something that's infinitely renewable from the same mob, although of course you can always breed goats and use them. Now if a goat drops a goat horn, like this one here that dropped 2, they will both be the same type. So one of the 4 screaming goat horns is this one called Call, and let's say one of its horns came off and we got the Call horn, its second horn would also be the Call horn, so it's interesting that goats sort of have a predetermined type of horn that they drop, and that both horns are that same type. So when this goat tries ramming into me and it hits a solid block, that horn will come off, but what blocks can it actually hit for the horn to come off of its head? Because let's say hitting into leaves or snow won't make that happen, or the same with maybe like a crimson plank or just some item that has nothing to do with the goat. So these are the only blocks in the game that a goat can ram and have its horn drop off. They are logs, iron ore, coal ore, copper ore, emerald ore, stone, and packed ice. So of course I'm sure most people would just use stone for this as it's the easiest, but of course logs are also somewhat easy as there's a lot of trees nearby these biomes. Now of course waiting for random chance to happen of a goat ramming something by accident and dropping its horn will basically take forever, and so here's how you can actually farm the process and super quickly get tons of goat horns. So to make an automatic goat horn farm is fairly easy. You basically want to make a large enclosure that is 10 blocks wide with a roof on it. Here I have fences that are 3 blocks tall, but more or less it's up to you. I'd also suggest having an easy way in and out, and a chest with some wheat nits so you can breed the goats up. But for the part that's actually important that you can't really customize, is the part that gives us the goat horns. So start by digging a 10 block wide by 4 like this area, and on the bottom part here, put redstone dust all the way along here, then cover those up with whatever block you want. I'll just use grass blocks, but it completely doesn't matter. Also down here place some pistons, 10 sticky pistons all facing up like that. On top of that put stone or logs. This has to be stone or logs, it's whichever one you want, but it's important that the goat horns actually come off. Then in front of that put a row of pressure plates down. These can be any material you want, but I would suggest using wood just because it's cheapest. Now on top of the stone place lightning rods. This is a shocking twist where there's actually a really good use for lightning rods. And behind each one of those place an armor stand. It doesn't matter which way it's facing, but they may as well all face forward like this. And also once you've made the enclosure, make sure to light it up so that no hostile mobs come in. Now above each one of the lightning rods we're going to place a wooden block all the way across here. This also can be any block you want. I just have wood for my roof, and I would suggest having this block match whatever your roof is made out of. And we'll put those 2 here. Now to basically finish the farm, just walk over each one of the pressure plates. That will push both of these up like you can see right here, and that will now make it so that the goats cannot get back there when they walk through. They won't just go over these blocks that lift up, and ideally the goats will run towards this and they will ram into the block instead of into the armor stand, because they do count armor stands as something that they can run into. And now we just have to lead goats into here and the goat farm is done. Now the more goats the better, of course, and something I would recommend is having a big supply of wheat that you can go through here and breed up all the goats. Especially once the goats have lost their horns, then you can breed those goats up to still get babies out of them, making them be useful again. And once you bred up all the goats and have just tons of goats in here, you can basically leave the area and just let the magic happen. Now, of course, we don't have a collection system here. We could have one set up with allays or maybe with hopper minecarts beneath, but you don't really need to, and I'll tell you the reason why. These goats extremely quickly will lose their horns. Now, of course, we have a lot here, although you can get them very quickly with breeding. You can see already a goat has rammed, and we now have a goat horn of feel. And this goat farm is actually super efficient if you have a bunch of goats in here, because they'll all ram into the blocks very quickly, giving you tons and tons of the horns. The horns don't drop every time they ram, because sometimes they will not hit the block in time, but I would say it happens enough that you can get them very quickly. And so you could set this up and just check on it every once in a while to pick those up, or have an LA trained with a goat horn. You can just see one dropped off right there, and it's really quick that these accumulate. But something you may be wondering is, having all these goats is great, but how do I actually get these screaming goat horns? Because of course that's a type you cannot just get from the pillager outposts. Well, once you've bred up a screaming goat, what you want to do is you want to breed that screaming goat with a different goat and observe what kind of baby you get. The reason for this is if a screaming goat breeds with a standard goat, you will have a 50% chance of a screaming goat and a 50% chance of a normal goat, but if a screaming goat breeds with a screaming goat, you will have a 100% chance of a screaming goat baby. So once you have even one screaming goat identified, you can continue to breed that with other goats, and that will give you an infinite supply of screaming goats and an infinite supply of goat horns that are of the screaming variety. You could even build two of these farms in parallel. One of them has a bunch of normal goats and one of them has a bunch of screaming goats, if you want to mass produce the goat horns. Also, the reason why I would suggest the roof of this being these slabs is because then no snow will go on top of it, but as well as that, no mobs will spawn up there, so you don't have to spawn proof it. Sometimes a goat will by accidentally get its way back into here, so if you just break 2 blocks here, if a goat happens to get trapped, it can always walk back out, but oftentimes it'll just walk back out on its own, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's just whatever you want. And even once the goats ram these armor stands back, it'll still work at full efficiency, because they'll still see them there. And that's how you make an efficient goat farm. You can see with the addition of these trained alleys, we've now made this farm fully automatic. We can just stand in the corner and let all the alleys give us the horns, as of course if they throw the horn incorrectly, they'll just pick it up again. You could even have a hopper at your feet or have these trained to note blocks. It's completely up to you. Considering goat horns are the whole point of the goat, let's hear what all these sounds are like. The first one is ponder. And you'll notice there's a cooldown there of 6 seconds between every goat horn. The second one is sing. And all of these first 4 horns are standard goat horns. That is the third goat horn, seek, and you can tell that is the pillager raid sound. And it's actually interesting, as I believe goat horns were partially added to make sense of why the pillagers have a sound like that, when you can't have any horns like that in game. The fourth and last normal goat sound is feel. A very interesting and low sound. Now for the 4 screaming goat sounds. The first one is called admire. Definitely an interesting goat horn. Now we have call. This one sounds a bit evil, and as lots of you told me in the comments of a previous video having to do with goat horns, it does sound a bit like the THX logo sound. And the third one is yearn. Also very low, a little bit like feel. The final goat horn is dream, and this is the last screaming goat horn as well. This one is also a bit similar to admire. You can kind of tell there it's almost the same, just a bit lower. Either way, those are all the goat horn sounds. Now here are some interesting facts about goats and goat horns. That sound is heard from every single direction 256 blocks away, but it is limited by things like the server view distance, so let's say it is really low, then it would not be a full 256 blocks. That does make alerting other players with the goat horn to be a super cool use of it. If you're ever having an issue with goats jumping too much, if they're on top of honey blocks, they actually can't jump at all. I guess because they're stuck on there. Of course they can walk around, but they cannot jump, making a little enclosure like this impossible for them to get out of. but of course if those were standard blocks they could either jump out or just walk out. And the last and probably most interesting fact about goats is that their sounds come from real goats. The developers at Mojang actually recorded the sounds of real domesticated goats to give you the full experience. I do wonder how they got some of the screaming goat and goat death sounds, and it's interesting to think that all those crazy screaming goat sounds are actually made by real goats. Anyway, if you think this video was the GOAT, make sure to press the like button and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.